Hello! You're listening to the Oklahoma Onstage podcast, the online source for all things theater in Oklahoma. We're glad you've joined us. We would love to hear your feedback, so drop us an email at oklahomaonstage@gmail.com or use the comment form on our website, which is oklahomaonstage.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe. Oh, and leave us a rating and review. It would really help us out. Now, sit back and relax. Another great episode starts right now.
Oklahoma on stage, the stories come alive. With drama, dance, and music, the arts always thrive. From center stage to backstage lore, Oklahoma on stage, there's always something more.
Welcome back to Oklahoma On Stage. As always, I'm Tim, your host. Today we are sitting in Wampa with our host today, Ms. Melodie Coulter-Pennington. Hopefully, I always try to make sure I say those names right, and I always forget to ask before we start, so I'm glad I got that one right. So we're going to, like I said, I normally try to give a big intro for this, but I decided this one probably not because we're going to talk a lot about it anyway. So we're just going to jump right into this. Melodie, let's just ask the elephant in the room. How and when did the theater bug bite you?
Oh, it was a kindergarten production of The Three Little Pigs. We had our after-school program, and I had some friends at our after-school program that we decided to make pig costumes, and then suddenly we were crafting a whole costume closet for The Three Little Pigs, and we decided we were going to put on a production. We had our little rehearsals every day after school, and then we had a 3-day run of The Three Little Pigs. I missed one of them because I got like a prize from a teacher to go hang out and build Legos at her house. And so super disappointed. But after that, I wanted to be on stage all the time. I was a really early reader, so I got to be the narrator in one of our little musical class productions that year. So I was on stage the whole time, guiding the story through. And, from there, I was a military brat. So we moved around a lot. And Missoula Children's Theater really loves going on to military bases, especially during the summertime, and doing little productions. And so I auditioned for those every single time and did them up until I think my sophomore year of high school was the last time that I had time to do that over a summer. And we finished out with the production of The Princess and the Pea. I was the princess. One of my good little friends was the pea. And from then on, just trying to find every opportunity I could to be on stage.
Was there ever a moment growing up when you realized that theater wasn't just a hobby, but it was what you were called to do?
I don't know that I ever realized it, but when I was an adult, I realized how much I missed it, probably about 2018. And I missed like the social group of being in theater. I took a long break. I didn't feel like there was a real place for me while I was pursuing my bachelor's degree to be also doing theater. So I did some other like adjacent like emceeing and hosting, and then got in, started my career. I had a kid, and then by 2018 I kind of like woke up and said I want to get back on stage, and I chickened out several times. When you're jumping back into theater, especially as like a working adult and a parent, it can feel like a huge barrier to getting back on stage.
Of course.
And then in 2020, I started working with somebody who was active with Sapulpa Community Theater, and they did a melodrama, and he said, you should come out for it. You love theater. This is a chance to get into it. And I had started picking up improv. I'd been doing improv classes for a couple of months toward the end of 2020. And so when this opportunity to audition came up, I went ahead and it was even better than I remembered it. Like going through an audition process, we did cold reads for that one. So it was a very easy prep. I went in and I had an absolute blast, and then life got in the way, and suddenly it was like a year and a half later, they started doing Flowers for Algernon, and the person playing Norma had to drop. And the director from Fate of Fairchild Farm called me and said, "Hey, we have a spot. Would you like to be in this show?" I'm an avid reader. I loved Flowers for Algernon growing up. So I said yes. And then, and then improv really started to take over my life in a good way. And so I put more theater on hold. And then an improv friend got me in with a startup production company that just put on their first 2 shows this year in May and August. And now I'm kind of stuck with them because I really, really love the director team they have going on there.
Before we go any further, we said in the intro that we're at Wampa. Can you tell us what is Wampa?
Yeah, Wampa, I know the WOM in it is west of Maine. I don't know what the PA is for, and I meant to Google it before because I had a feeling that the space would come up. It's a mixed use kind of space. There's residential spots. There's some food trucks that operate out of here, some steady businesses, folks that need like a little bit of retail space, or like masseuses, or those who need office spaces or co-working opportunities. And then they also do events. They do weddings and fundraisers. And most recently, well, in my experience with it, American Theater Company took over this old shipping dock and an office and converted the office into a green room. And the shipping dock is now a black box theater. It seats about 50 people. It's got very simple lighting. There's a Bluetooth and like a stick mic, but very like punk rock, pop up in here and do a show. And what they did was when they opened the theater the first 2 months, they offered it to creatives, just a 50-50 ticket split. And so we booked 2 shows in that time frame just to see how we liked performing in the space. We did our first production in March. It was a tabletop RPG inspired improv, basically do a one-shot Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. It's called Laugh Finder to play on that particular system. We did that show, and we loved every moment of being in the space. All of our guests were really thrilled to be there. And so the next day I was texting the folks at Wampa and said, "Hey, what can we do to get rehearsal space in here and regular shows?" Because we're called Third Space. That's our improv group. But we don't have like an actual space that feels like our third space. That's like a regular spot. What can we do? And they said, "We're not really sure what that kind of model would look like. Let's talk about it." And we did a little bit of research about what similar market sizes do for like nonprofit theater groups for rehearsal space, and came to a nice like agreement that we have 6 hours of rehearsal time in the theater every month. And then we do a ticket split with a very, very generously low minimum. So we have a show a month in the black box. Outside of American Theater Company, of course, uses the space for their productions. And then other groups book out. And so like our festival that we're having in October, we don't have a show going on in October because the only date that we could have had one was during our festival, and it was already booked for that weekend. So.
Understood. So, okay, so going back to you, what were who were some of your earliest artistic influences, either on stage or off stage?
Yeah, so off stage, I'm a very like novice artist, and so big Georgia O'Keeffe fan, really inspired by like nature and like exploring life and death. When it comes to on-stage influences, my dad grew up in Oklahoma, and so I was raised on a lot of Kristen Chenoweth And so I had probably more Broadway exposure than somebody would expect from like a small town kid running around with parents who are not very theatrical. My mom is a beautiful singer. She did not pass that gene on to me. But neither of them are really theatrical people. And then I was a big George Carlin fan, big Robin Williams fan. And so I thought I wanted to do movies, and then that seemed like a lot of work. Very like multi-interested person, but following just people who make me laugh and do impressive work. And then are real hustlers. So
You said that you were a military brat, so you moved around a lot, but you came back to Oklahoma in 2011.
yes.
So what was that like coming back here?
It was a much easier transition than I ever expected. I never got to grow up in Oklahoma. Was born in New Mexico, and the closest we ever got to living in Oklahoma over my childhood was living in North Texas. And so I knew when I was looking at college opportunities that I didn't want to stay in Idaho, which is where I graduated. So I had lots of friends there, but it didn't feel like home. Didn't really have the programs that I wanted to pursue. And I knew that my parents weren't going to be there for very long. And so I wanted to go somewhere where I had a lot of support. And most of my paternal family was still living in Oklahoma at the time. We grew up chanting Boomer Sooner. So there I was looking at college programs and landed on OU and got moved into my dorm. And I was like, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. And then when I started the job hunt after graduation, I got an offer in Tulsa. We crossed the Arkansas River to do our little apartment hunt, and just a big feeling of like, this is home. This is what roots feel like. And now I'm like one of Tulsa's biggest fans. We bought a brick that was like Tulsa's own Mr. and Mrs. Coulter when we got married that sits on Route 66 now, because like I'm so all in about Tulsa. Just I've never really encountered like a community the way that Oklahoma immediately welcomed me. And no matter where I end up in Oklahoma, I end up in Stillwater a lot, and everybody treats you like you're their next door neighbor, and they're getting ready to, invite you over for a cookout. And Tulsa is just so fun and open and welcoming. And Norman was such a great time when I was in college. Just, I never felt like an outsider. And I graduated from a very small high school in a like rural part of Idaho, and did not expect a college campus of, 30,000 people to feel small. And most of the time it felt small. It felt comfortable and homey and familiar.
I ask a lot of people when I come across people that have traveled a lot and everything, and I ask them that question, why Oklahoma? I've met a lot of people, from overseas that are living here. I'm like, why? You got all these places in the world to choose from. Why Oklahoma? And I think the way you explained that was spot on. That once you come here, you find out what home feels like. There's just something about so many people, they come to Oklahoma and they never leave. And that's why. So that's really, really, really cool. So you talked about improv becoming a big part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started in improv.
Yeah. So I think most people who have ever been a high school theater kid are familiar with the classic improv games and a little zip zap zop. And having that skill on stage is important to develop, especially if you're a person who can forget a line really quickly, or knows that you've got, cast members who may not remember their line. And rather than feeding them the line, you want to kind of ease them into it. And then when I met my husband in 2020, his improv theater was trying to get some grant funding to keep up their space. And so I got to hear him talk about improv, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with improv. Didn't do a whole lot of it as improv. I was a big Whose Line Is It Anyway fan, especially in middle school. We watched a lot of it in our theater classes. Um, but as soon as I went to a workshop at his theater, once they started kind of offering programming again, I was like, oh, I want to try this out as a class. And the way that the two major improv programs in Tulsa, the way they operate is a class showcase, a graduation show. And we did that first graduation showcase, and I was like, I'm all in. Let's do this. How can I do more improv? Anytime I got offered a spot on a show, I was there. When do we need to be at rehearsal? What games are we going to play? How are we going to do this? And moved up through the classes up until I left that theater with a lot of excitement and joy. We produced some sketch shows too, where I got to do a little bit of acting, a little bit more serious, like sit down and memorize those lines and really develop a character. But it was just like, it took off, and I really poured like my all into the theater that we were with at the time. Just loved it so much, and I loved the people, and still love the people. I had, like 20 of them at my house last night.
There you go. So along that same lines, kind of dive into this just a little bit. What does improv mean to you?
Improv? Collaborative commentary is a phrase I keep coming back to when I think about improv, but especially now that I've kind of put myself in a nonprofit space with it. When I learned about Viola Spolin, like really dove into improv as its own entity that is theater adjacent. Viola Spolin really spoke to me. I'm a person who's big sociology person. I want to do. I'm in the beginning stages of pursuing a PhD in sociology, and part of that is because of how instrumental improv is in social work. Cool. And I just find that whenever I'm having a hard time parsing something out, and therapy's not doing it for me, and I see a therapist regularly. I think everyone should.
Absolutely.
But there's something to be said about getting together with your community and just playing pretend for a few minutes that helps me work out things, even if it's not a direct moment in a scene where I'm, working out what my mom said to me last week. I'm still like kind of letting go and letting my brain kind of react and respond in a spot where I know that it's okay to say something really outlandish and like move into that flow. And so it's been really, especially like with the pandemic and the state of politics in the world and, being a person who's chronically online, getting together and just looking at everybody and saying, wow, this is what we're going through, or here's how we're going to look at what we're going through the lens of puppets in outer space or whatever, is just a really powerful moment to say, like, hey, we're not alone. We've got your back. We're going to create something together. And, it may become something a little more permanent in the form of like writing a sketch inspired by a scene we did, or it can be this very ethereal moment that's very pure and goes out into the world, and then we can kind of proceed after that.
It's very interesting. Very cool description. I like that. So you mentioned a little bit without mentioning the company. You got involved with Something Brothers Productions.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Something Brothers Productions. It's run by Justin Hendricks and Tim Welch, who are longtime theater kids. I think they grew up in Sepulpa. I may have that wrong, but they did theater together in high school, and then they started writing together through college. And when Wampa put together their American Theater Company deal with the ticket split, they tried, we ended up not being able to, but they tried to claim some dates to put on an adaptation of The Miser. And we ended up taking that to a different theater space because we had conflicts. And it was a real renegade production. It was like 5 weeks from casting to curtain. And we did a one night only performance. We filmed it the night before in a full tech dress rehearsal over at Theater West, put it together and had an absolute blast. And so that has really, I think, informed the model of how they're doing their shows from now on. We just finished up the Scottish play in August, and that was 6 weeks from table read to curtain. Again, another one night only. We sold out 4 hours before the show started. It was like we seated 150 people and there were no door tickets. But it was just a really incredible production. We cut maybe an hour out of the script. There was blood everywhere. I think they just have some really cool things that they want to see done in the theater space. They're really passionate about getting it to a point where they can pay their artists, which is a hard thing to find in Tulsa. We've got a lot of really amazing theater companies and a lot of great talent in Tulsa. And it's hard to commit to a production when you know that you're not getting paid out of it. And so they're really working on setting up relationships with the theaters and venue owners and with their talent to say, like, we want to pay you. And right now, we're working in trades and stuff. Tim is a tattooist, and so he did some of my most recent work at a heavy, heavy discount as a thank you for being in 2 of his shows. And
Very nice.
He's really looking toward like experimenting a little bit more with people who aren't super well established in the Tulsa theater community. Like, he took a chance. He reached out to me on Facebook to audition for The Miser, and I sent a video audition, and it was just like a recommendation from an improv friend that he reached out to me. And, wanting to kind of set a standard of how we treat each other so that the theater community in Tulsa feels a little bit fractured, not in a negative way, but just like everybody's kind of doing their own thing. But there's a really cool thing that they're trying to do. And then with their adaptations, they're trying to say something without taking too much out of it. We set The Miser in the 90s. We had some really good, like good theater nerd moments talking about like character motivation and why Harpagon treats his family the way he does, and how this like split personality that he develops and like explores a little bit in these monologue scenes where he's telling himself, you can't trust your children, but why not? My children would never do that. Well, no, they're all greedy, is a very like grief driven monster. And like how Elise acts like she's spoiled and has these like daddy issues because of watching her father navigate his own grief, and he's got this stupid helpless son. And it was just really cool, like, opportunity to take a script that was, an hour 15 and dive in. And then when we did the Scottish play, we set it in modern United States, and the only thing that we like actually changed in the script from the original Shakespeare was taking out references to Scotland, and so it would just be like the land or the country. And it was just really cathartic to explore a lot of that fear and frustration and horror of American politics without ever saying what the actual monster is. And so it was this very prescient presentation that had people like wow. And watching it, I was Lady Macduff, so I got to watch a good chunk of it at Dress. And then Studio 308 has a camera that connects to a screen backstage so you can watch what's going on. So I watched the whole rest of the show from backstage after my death and was like just so brokenhearted in the best way that we did a one night only, because like what lightning we've struck with this incredible production. So I have nothing but good things to say about them. They're producing an original next weekend. And so I've got tickets for that, and my improv group sponsored this show. This is a smaller cast, so this means this cast is getting paid. But they're doing an original that's an exploration of grief, that I think is just going to be absolutely phenomenal. And we're capping off the year with a comedy. I haven't heard what it's going to be yet, but auditions are about to come up for it, and I'm really excited to see what we do, because it's going to be exciting to go from like this like tragic comedy to Shakespeare's horror play to a kind of grief-driven comedy to something just like pure fun, silly. So
I was going to say there seems to be, you talked a little bit about it a minute ago about therapy. Seems to be there's a little bit of that going on with them as well.
Oh yeah, just it's very human, and I think it's really pushing some incredible performances from people. We had a lot of debut actors. Jacob Ide, who's in Othello coming up. The Scottish play was his first ever time acting on stage, and just, I mean, chilling to have him look me in the eyes and tell me, things are going to be okay. Trust your husband, keep your head low. And like, I don't know that in the years that I've been on stage, I've ever been so personally affected by what's going on stage by another actor, but just getting to see that kind of talent pulled out and teased out through their direction is really, really awesome.
That was really cool, because that was actually kind of the next question I had was there a moment either in Lady Macduff or another recent role that challenged you emotionally or technically? And just you talking about that, it's interesting how sometimes the performance or the work of another actor can affect us more than our own. And I think that's really, really good. So tell us a little bit about through all of this. You founded, as we talked a little bit about, Third Space Society. What brought that about?
Yeah. So toward the end of my experience with my previous improv theater, it started to feel a little bit like, and this is a pretty common in the Tulsa comedy community, we've had sort of a feminist renaissance that's been pretty recent, and it's been led by like the work of like Evan Hughes, working and supporting with a lot of like minority and a lot of female comedians. Around 2023, we started to feel a little bit like our voices weren't being heard. We were losing creative control of projects that were like organically created. And then there was a lot of labor and expectation on us that didn't feel balanced or like appropriate for what we were doing for the theater. And it came to a head in like mid-April of 2023. And I sat down with a few of my friends and I said, I don't know that I can continue being in this space and putting all of this work in when I'm feeling this way. And I wasn't even really one of the people that was the worst slighted. It just happened to be like that weekend, it was me. And they were like, honestly, we don't want to do it anymore either. And we sat for a moment and just realized we were losing something big by coming to this realization, because it was our third place. When we weren't home and we weren't at work, almost all the time we were at the theater. We were either helping, put in like, sweat equity into the theater, or we were at a rehearsal or a class or a jam or a show. And if we weren't in the show, then we were in the audience. And it felt like, if we walk away from this, at minimum, we're asking all of our friends to leave that home of theirs too. But there's also a good chance that if we walk away from this, we just completely lose all of our friends and this home. And we were like, how do we not lose that? And so like a week later, we called everybody over to my house and we were like, we're leaving the theater, and what we want to do is create a nonprofit so that we can have a really good chance at like arts grants, and some kind of fundraising and support, so that, because we could have just like done an improv troupe and just done improv around town. Doing that not tied to a theater is a really challenging thing. And we've got friends who came with us that had done that, had gone in that direction, and just found it really challenging to not be attached to a theater. That's changing. But, in 2023, we were still very like, how do we make sure that we have time and space and a little bit more control over our projects? And we wanted to teach, we wanted to share it, because we find improv is really important to us. We want to make sure other people see it. And that was very much the way that Viola Spolin operated when she brought the theater games to her social transition houses. It was because there was something deeper there. It wasn't just theater games. It was, this is how we bridge gaps in community and bring people together. And so everybody said, I'm willing to support you. And we were like, we're never going to make you choose between us and the other theater. Like, participate at your comfort level, and created this nonprofit. And, we had opportunities. We performed with my all-female improv troupe, Girl Talk, performed at Blue Whale. We performed at Mayfest. We got involved with the Tulsa Performing Arts Center's Orbit Arts Festival for the last couple of years. And we've got partnerships with the Equality Center, the Center for Creativity at the Tulsa Community College Metro Campus, All Souls Unitarian Church. We do classes during their Wednesday connections so that they can get, our participants can have childcare. And there's like a sliding scale meal beforehand. So kind of like make it very accessible and very approachable. And we want people to know that you don't have to be, this incredibly successful comedian to come into our space. There's a spot for you. This is where we all come together to kind of explore improv. And so it's become this really cool, organic community thing that then set us up for, in 2024, we did our strategic plan, and one of the things that we wanted to do was produce a comedy festival, because we love our time at Blue Whale. We love our time at other festivals, but we really wanted something that highlighted all of this amazing Oklahoma talent, because when we started Third Space, we really got to talking to more comedians. In our previous theater, it had been very insular. But once we got out there, we started talking to comedians. I became friends with Evan Hughes. I became friends with people like Kels Cooper. And these are, stand-up comedian names, but they are all like theater kid adjacent. And so we're all kind of supporting each other. We got in, there's a new group in town that's producing filmed sketches called Trouble Start. And they're just an incredible group of people writing these great original sketches and putting in some really incredible production value. And so we had this idea that we wanted to put together a festival, and the Type Rose Foundation heard our grant proposal and is helping fund this festival that is just this wildly remarkable beast of 3 days of comedy. And I tell people, if no one else shows up to this, I just feel like I'm going to invite more than 50 of the funniest people I've ever met to come put on a show for me. But it has really shown how the comedy community has grown and really become a supportive space, especially for women and especially for like minorities and individuals with disabilities, creating an accessible space for comedy that has really unified, the old theater. Those folks are still like very heavily involved with us. When Cody Mayo Studios opened its improv side of its acting studio, they brought in a gentleman that has taught at Second City, Ryan Archibald, and they latched on to our mission too. And so just watching this like powerhouse, it feels like, of 3 improv spaces that are also lifting up the comedy community. And as a result, everybody's getting more stage time. Everybody's realizing like the importance of paying your people and of like really respecting the time and talent that goes, behind the scenes and what's going on stage and, contributing to marketing. And so it's really been one of those rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing. And just wild that it started with like a sad conversation at Panera Bread. Just what am I going to do if I lose this theater that I've called home for several years? Am I going to lose my people? And, I can tell 2023 Melody is that, no, you're not going to lose your people. In fact, they're going to help you build something so much bigger than what you could have ever possibly dreamed for theater. And it's going to put you back into incredible productions with individuals that you probably would have never crossed paths with had you just continued on the course you were. So
I'm so glad that we've kind of turned that corner because, the first part of this conversation, there was a lot of tragedy and therapy, and Dart is like, surely there's a silver lining in here somewhere. So I'm so glad that we're starting to see that light at the end of the tunnel. There is something better. So this festival you were talking about, the Make 'em Laugh Festival, when does that go off?
yeah, it starts at 5 p.m. October 24th, and we conclude probably around 3:30, 3:45 that Sunday, the 26th. And it's an action-packed weekend. We start at TCC. We've got several stand-ups, and then we round off the TCC programming with my friend Ben Harper does incredible musical improv. And so even though my mom did not gift me her beautiful voice, she did gift me her love of music. And so I go up there and I sing confidently and silly. He's producing a group called Hit the Haw Note. So they do musical improv together. And then, we go in for more mixes of improv and stand-up over at the studio, which is a really cool venue space in the Kendall Whittier neighborhood. And then we get back to it. We have a family-friendly programming block because I really did want to emphasize to the community that comedy, anybody who wants to have access to comedy should have access to comedy, which is the big idea for this, is paying artists, and then the festival's completely free to attend. And so we wanted everybody to have a chance at it, doing an improv workshop. Then we have 3 family-friendly improv groups coming in, including a group called Waka Waka. They're from Oklahoma City Improv, and they do puppet musical improv. It's so wildly funny and fun. I've got a couple of stand-up friends who are performing at the festival who have children who have done a couple of tight fives before, and I was like, let's go ahead and throw them up during lunch hour and let them make some jokes and invite some kids who want to come tell a knock-knock joke up to the mic, because why not? It's so much fun to put a microphone in a kid's hand.
Absolutely.
It can be risky, but it's always got such great payoff. We did that here at Wampa. We did a fundraiser show for court-appointed special advocates of Tulsa County, and the whole idea of this fundraiser was to get kids interacting. And so all of the games that we played required us to like call people up to help us tell like a conducted story. Or we play a game called Pillars, where you have 2 additional audience members on stage and you kind of do a Mad Libs, like you're doing your lines to each other, and when you want a word, you tap their shoulder and they just say whatever word is in their head. And so we, swim in a river of bubble gum, and, there was plenty of little poop jokes thrown in.
Of course.
And it was probably 20 minutes of my most favorite improv I've ever done, just having those kids interact with it.
So now you're doing all this. You're also offering workshops. So you're teaching improv as well.
Yes.
And how did that come about?
Yeah. So I, in a former life, as of, a year ago, I was a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher. I taught in the library, and so I put on a performance every day because I can't just sit and read a book. It's got to be a whole production
Of course.
with voices and puppets or dolls or a felt board. And so I already had like a feeling that I liked teaching. And when we wanted to start the nonprofit, we felt like the best course was for us to go with a theater arts category, or theater arts education category that felt right to us and felt like, a lot of our founders are also like former educators or people that really wanted to exist in like a community service space, and providing those workshops, it was our avenue into community service for it, because we want others to access improv and feel like I don't have to immediately commit hundreds of dollars to a class. I think it's always worth it, but sometimes it's not like feasible. So our meat and potatoes for running the nonprofit side of things is making those workshops where the community is. So at the library, we started with some workshops at TCC doing their I Can't series. And so we go in once a semester on a Saturday morning and teach improv to whoever wants to show up. They're always free and open to the public. Teach them improv. We've got partnerships with Tulsa Library. We did a summer reading program workshop over at one of their libraries. We've done some pop-up workshops at Oklahomans for Equality, and just finding like spaces to let people in and learn. We've developed a little bit of a curriculum based on like what I understand of like general pedagogy, and then what I've learned from my own study of improv and my own study of theater, and then everybody else's expertise in performing, and just kind of mashed it all together to create something super fun that is then a springboard. If you're like, oh, you loved this, well, if you want to take it further and you want to go on stage, here are places you can go to do that. And then in the future, beyond the festival, our other big primary goal is setting up scholarship funding to help people who that may not be feasible for them to go take a couple $100 classes, or if they want to go even crazier and like head to Chicago and do an intensive, make something like that feasible for them.
Nice. That's really, really cool. Because, there's a lot of people that would love to do things like that. But, this day and age, not everybody's got that kind of funds to do that. So what's the most surprising thing that you've learned during teaching improv?
The line, I don't think I'm a funny person, has a 100% success rate at being the funniest person in the workshop every time. And I think there's a part of me that kind of expected that, because people always think they're not funny. But the reality is, like, if you just let your thoughts kind of go and react, people are so naturally funny. And the other half of it is finding out that I am funnier than I think. I used to think that I was really just the setup for the punchline kind of person. And I found that actually if I just relax and let myself be, I'm clocking jokes left and right.
There you go. So what's it like now being a student again, going with Cody Mayo Studios while also leading a nonprofit?
Yeah, I will say, I've always been a big believer that there's always something to learn and there's always something to be gained from like taking a beginner class. I danced ballroom professionally in college, but I still took beginner classes whenever I would like max out a level that we were in. When we were doing like our Latin dance club, we would, have levels in there. And once that was done, I would go back to the beginner, or I would go to the beginner workshops before socials just to brush up on the basics. Because if you just do a really good basic, you can still wow people on a dance floor. And so going into Arch's program, that was pretty much the same idea, was there's always something to learn. And then what I found is that Arch's program is so vastly different from any other beginner improv. I think I'd liken it to the first ballet class I ever took. I took ballet my senior year of college, and I was the only person in there with no ballet experience. So even though it was ballet 1, it was really like a ballet 3 or 4 class. And that's kind of how this improv program feels, is that you want to have like some familiarity, because Arch isn't teaching you, here's how you yes and. It's really, how do you build a scene? How do you establish a character on the fly? How do you write that in your head? So it really pulls like really strong theater sensibilities, which makes sense because a lot of their initial audience for this class is screen actors. And then it's the comedy community, which is just, when you come from an acting studio and you add improv, you're going to pull in a lot of folks that you probably wouldn't have expected to see in a comedy class. But Arch is just a really flexible and adaptive teacher. And so when he understands where your strengths are, the class then kind of forms around how to build those strengths and get rid of some of your bad habits on stage. He's also one of those kinds of people that does the most effective positive criticism I've ever heard. Every time that Arch tells me I did something well, he explains why it worked so that I can kind of put that in my pocket and replicate that in future scenes.
That's good.
And even his like constructive feedback is always this gentle but like firm in the way that each student needs it, kind of like really excellent direction. And so I feel like in the 10 months I've been a student of Arch's, my improv has grown like exponentially, and just it's phenomenal. It feels not like I'm taking beginner courses. I guess I'm not anymore. I've graduated his actual like 4-level program, and we're now doing advanced improv and learning, like different structures like the Herald, and doing this really like psychedelic jazzy kind of improv. But it's just like a stark difference. We did some short form games, very Whose Line style, for like level 1, but they were different short form games than I had ever done, except for like a 4-scene one. We call it 4 square at CMS, but like you have 2 people doing a 2-person scene, and then you rotate and you're in a square. And that's the only game that I was like, I'm very familiar with this game. The rest of it was all learning, and has really changed how I teach improv too. Because when we do we call them open plays, and they're a little jam that we get together and do roughly every other Thursday over at TCC. When I'm watching in like our theater and comedy spaces, people asking questions about improv, I will invite them there, and then I am able to use things I've learned from Arch to really hone in on a problem that they're having. I had a friend who said, how do you prepare so that you never feel like you don't have something when you go up on stage? Like, do you have a phrase that you like to start scenes with just to see where it goes? Or do you have something literally in your pocket that you pull out, And I was like, oh, scene starting when I feel like the suggestion somebody gives me was something I used to be super duper nervous about, but Arch has given me a ton of tools. And I was like, there's this great exercise that not only has it been helpful for scene starting, but then it takes it further and helps me when I'm feeling a little railroaded on stage. And it has helped me do more long form, like improvised sketch work where I can sustain a 20-minute scene because of this game that he gave me. And so we invited her to the jam. I taught the game, and then we used that to work on her initial request and used it to expand. And when I sat down, I was like, damn, I've become a much better teacher at improv just by watching somebody so skilled at teaching improv.
Wow. That's amazing. So you got a lot going on, a lot of good things going
Yeah.
on. Everything seems to be building. So what's next for Melody and Third Space?
Yeah. Riff Raff here in Tulsa is doing a production of Antigone. I am going to audition for that. At the beginning of the year, like early spring, there was Pembroke doing Lysistrata. And in college, I took a history of the theater class. And our midterm, we had studied Lysistrata and Antigone. And I got to the midterm. It was a proctored midterm for an online course. So I roll up to the testing center. It's like 7 a.m. I go in there, and the question was like, what elements of Antigone are classic drama elements? And my brain confused Antigone and Lysistrata.
Well,
And so I wrote a dramatic consideration of Lysistrata, and I was like, this is so weird. Why is she asking this? But I'm going to go ahead and write it. Submitted my test. I felt really great about it. I get into my car, and like a truck just
my goodness.
smacks into my head. Oh my God. She asked for a consideration of Antigone. And it's like, I could have totally written that. So I send the teacher an email, and I'm like, hey, here's what happened. I can reschedule the midterm and do it again. And she said, I'll just grade it based on what you have. That's hilarious. I got to be on the midterm. You know, I applied the work. It just wasn't to the right play. But having that in my mind, I auditioned for Lysistrata because I was like, how wonderful would it be that within, 12 months, I could do Lysistrata and I could do Antigone. And I got a call back for Lysistrata, but what a powerhouse cast I was up against. And I went and saw it. They set it in the Vietnam War, and just a full delight. I just was overcome. So I'm only sad I didn't get to be a part of it because it was such a good production.
Right.
But I'm still like honing in on preparing. Riff Raff does these incredible shows that like they're award winning already. I think this is their first season. Just absolutely crushing it. I unfortunately missed Rossum's Universal Robots, but my husband was overcome. He talked about the play for like 2 weeks afterwards and how amazing it was. And it was in the former AHA space. So they like to use very unconventional spots. They did St. Joan at the studio, which was powerful. I think I was sick the day of auditions. And because I had planned to go to auditions, I had not prepared a video audition. So I missed out. And it's always been kind of like that works out, right? I got my role in the Scottish play a week after I absolutely bombed my Pembroke audition for Romeo and Juliet. I worked on that monologue for a solid month and a half, opened the audition door, said, hey, my name's Melody. Here's my acting resume. Forgot the entire thing. I'm like, great. But then, it works out. But Riff Raff, most recently, they did, oh my God, I can't remember the name of it. It was a Hitchcock adaptation too. I'm sure it'll come to me.
You're going to cheat. It wasn't Rope, was it?
It was Rope. Thank you. Oh my gosh. I was like, there was an element in the play that was in there. So they just did Rope
Right.
at Living Arts Tulsa, which is an art gallery. And they set up, the stage was this whole open spot. And they had tables with like tablecloths and party invitations as the programs. And there was a signature drink, which is the drink that the victim loves. And so you feel very immersed in their world, and just very similar to Something Brothers, and how like their adaptations don't change a whole lot of what's going on, the central functions of the play, but they're really creating art with it. And I think sometimes people forget how much theater arts are an art.
Absolutely.
And watching these kinds of shows, like from a performer's perspective, it feels really great to be a part of that. And then from an audience perspective, it's just enchanting to feel like part of the stories that they're telling. And just, I leave productions like that like shaking with how excited I am to know these people and to get to watch these incredible things be done and anticipate that I can be a part of the next thing going on.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And there's a lot of that going on up here in Tulsa. There's a lot of that going on. So, what kind of legacy do you hope to leave behind with all of this impactful improv stuff that's going on?
Yeah. We use the word community resilience a lot, and adjacent to all of the work that Third Space has been doing, Colby Ari, he's a high school friend of my husband's, so we had been aware of him. He is really spearheading an effort to rebuild the Dreamland Theater, which was destroyed in the Tulsa Race Massacre, and then again destroyed when they built the IDL. And part of Colby's mission with that isn't just rebuilding the theater, but this restoration of community spaces, and how, he did a great screening of Join or Die, which is a documentary about the reduction in participation in clubs and other community spaces in the United States, and how that's affecting us socially, how it's affecting us economically, it's affecting us politically. And that if people just get out and participate in something, then we'll all be better off for it, better individual health outcomes, better public health outcomes. And so ultimately what I want is for Third Space to long outlive all of our founders and be this part of a Tulsa that really gets out there and participates and comes together for conversation and to be creative.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I think you kind of really hit the nail on the head. I think if anything from the pandemic showed us is that what social media has done instead of help us really has made us more antisocial. And so the more that we can get involved, and I think it's even, from one theater to another, the theaters working together, getting involved and bringing that community beyond the borders of one stage to another.
Absolutely.
I think that's really something cool. So
I think that's something I love about Tulsa that can sometimes be frustrating, is that there are very few accessible traditional theaters, right? You've got agreements with the PAC, but that their schedule books up fast, and then you're also competing with everything else going on in the PAC.
Absolutely.
Like, it's kind of hard to justify coming and seeing a community theater group's production of Rope if it's in the same building as the Outsiders musical's traveling cast. But there's so many cool renegade spaces.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And it's a hard thing too. Social media, I sometimes find out about things like a week after they've been produced, but really just getting out in the community, like taking a stroll down at the farmers market and looking at the posters that are up for productions around town is like so powerful for getting me out of the house.
Absolutely.
And getting engaged in these. And then suddenly I'm not just hearing about it on social media a week after it happened. I know 3 people that auditioned for that show, and one of them who's in that show. And now I'm there and we're all engaged in this really cool thing.
Yeah, I was just involved with a show just here recently, in a show just here recently with a young lady who came up to be a part of a show of a theater I had never heard of, relatively young theater here in town, Little Shop of Productions.
Yes.
I was just like, okay, what is this all about? And so it's amazing how, so many, one of the things we talked about here recently when I got started or really got involved with the podcast and everything, is we're starting to discover this, what one director called this theater or actor exchange, where we're seeing actors and stuff from small towns that are really, really good and coming into Oklahoma City and Tulsa, or even more, actors from Oklahoma City and Tulsa going out to these smaller communities. And so largely embracing this community aspect, but expanding the reach of the arts.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just phenomenal what's going on. And you guys are actually playing a part of that. And I really commend you guys for that.
Thank you. That's our pride and joy, just getting to see each other just thrive and shine and, reach new people and come together.
Absolutely. All right. So as we wrap up here today, I've got this little thing that we like to do. For you being an improv person, this should be right up your alley. So we try to end all of our wrap ups with our curveball questions. We call it our curtain call. And so just some quirky, personal, imaginative questions we come up with. I usually plug these into AI and let AI come up with something and see what happens. So just what we'll do is we'll give you some questions, just the first thing that comes off the top of your head, okay? What's the weirdest warm-up exercise you've ever done before a show?
Oh my gosh. We have a regular one that we call Shake It Out, where we shake our limbs out, counting down from 8, and then we go back through and do it by 1. It looks real culty backstage, and I always feel super bad whenever, like at the Orbit Arts Festival, people are running around backstage because, we're all running to like 6 or 7 different stages, and there's somebody in a beautiful flamenco dress running through, and we're over here shaking our limbs and chanting rhythmically.
The funny thing is, I'm currently involved in a show at Civic Center in Oklahoma City, and we've got some young people in the production that they do the same exercise. Started out at 1, and they graduate each round. They go down by 1 number, and it's like by the end they're just it's pretty crazy. So, okay, so. If you could do an improv scene with any fictional character, who would it be?
Any fictional character. Oh my gosh. I know it's supposed to be off the dome, but I'm like, any fictional character. I would probably say Lee from The Lowdown, just because that's what I've been watching lately. But, Leroy Chapman, the actual Tulsa historical figure, was just such a zany guy. And just full of knowledge and full of great drops, and CMS's improv, like the performances are very like Oklahoma specific and very leaning into like being just off Route 66 and being in a historic district over on Studio Row. That, just being able for him to drop some really great Tulsa histories like would be amazing.
That's pretty cool. Okay, if you had to replace your car horn with any sound effect from a cartoon, what would it be and why?
Oh, the Donald Duck, wah, wah, like, just because I hate when people honk horns, because I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to communicate to me.
That's fair.
So at least have a laugh.
Okay, you've been given a 1-minute shopping spree in a gas station. What's in your basket after the buzzer goes off?
Tons of Twix, Sour Patch Kids, and then the Gardetto's mixes.
Nice. What's your go-to karaoke song?
I love doing Creep by Radiohead. There's a musical interlude in there that I know is absolutely painful for karaoke goers, but on the rare occasions that I do drink when I do karaoke, I am all over the stage. Run!
Of course, yeah, of course. Okay, so any parting words of wisdom for our listeners at home?
Parting words of wisdom. Yes, and in improv is an improv tenet, but it is also a really incredible way to lead your life. Yes, there's an audition coming up, and I'm going to try my hardest. Yes, I didn't get cast, and I'm really excited to see why I didn't get cast. Yes, I don't want to do my job anymore, and I'm going to apply for another job and find something really great. And just remembering that life is gonna life, just like in an improv scene, things aren't always gonna go your way. You're gonna help out on stage with an idea, and somebody's going to start a scene that does not mesh with your idea. And you say, yes, that happened, and we are going to proceed with the scene that it is. And I feel like that's so applicable to life. A lot of theater wisdom has become like personal wisdom Like, the idea of no small parts, only small actors. So taking, if you've got 3 lines in this scene of your life, like, that's what you've got, and you're gonna, chew the fucking scenery.
Yep.
So
Make the best of them. I've told people a lot that I've had a lot of roles where I'm literally on stage for about 3 seconds, but I guarantee you that's going to be the most memorable 3 seconds of that show. So, Melody, thank you for being a part of this. We appreciate your time.
thank you so much, Tim. This was a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So, everybody else for tuning in, thank you for giving us part of your time, for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed this time here. We thank you phenomenally for your support, and above all else, we ask you continue to support the arts.
Oklahoma on stage.